My name is Kendra, and today I want to tell you the story of why I became homeless and the unimaginable things I've had to endure. It's a story of betrayal, survival, and ultimately redemption. Growing up, I always felt like the odd one out in the family. I wasn't born into this family, but when I was just a little girl, I was placed in foster care. The people who took me in, my foster parents, were kind at first. They gave me a home and the things I needed. But over time, I started to realize that the love I thought was there wasn't quite as unconditional as I had hoped. It wasn't just the small things, the way they would treat me differently compared to their biological children, or how they always seemed to be disappointed in me no matter what I did. It was something deeper, something more unsettling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I grew older, I learned to keep my head down and do what I was told just to stay out of trouble and try to earn their approval. But no matter how hard I tried, it felt like I was still just a kid they were forced to take care of, not someone they truly cared for. The real turning point came when I turned 18. That was when everything changed. According to the state, I was now an adult, and that meant I had to take care of myself. I wasn't a child anymore, and they expected me to live on my own. But I wasn't ready for the world outside. I had no real skills, no support, and no idea how to survive on my own. I remember the day they told me to leave. It was my 18th birthday, and I thought maybe I could start fresh. I expected maybe a little celebration, maybe some kind words, but instead I was told that I was no longer part of their life. "You're an adult now," they said. "You're on your own." My heart sank. I couldn't believe it. I'd spent my whole life in foster care, and now, on my birthday, I was being cast aside by the only family I had ever known. They didn't want me anymore. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I remember standing in the doorway, looking back at the house that had once been my home, and feeling the weight of the world come crashing down on me. I didn't know it at the time, but this moment, the moment they kicked me out, would be the start of a long and difficult journey. One I never could have imagined. One where I'd be tested beyond anything I'd ever thought possible. But at that moment I only knew one thing: I had to leave. I had no other choice. With a small suitcase in my hand, I walked out the door. And just like that, I was alone. It was the beginning of my fight to survive, to find a place in the world, and to face the darkness that would soon come to light. But I didn't know it then. All I knew was that I was on my own, and I had no idea how to survive. This is how it all began. I spent the next few weeks in a state of shock. I wandered the streets, not knowing where to go or what to do. The world outside my foster home was overwhelming and harsh, but I had no choice but to keep moving. No one wanted to help a homeless 18-year-old, especially one with no family and no skills to offer. I stayed in parks, under bridges, anywhere I could find some shelter. I met other homeless people who, despite their struggles, gave me advice. I learned how to survive, how to beg for food, where to find temporary places to sleep, and how to keep my guard up at all times. I also learned the hard way that you can't trust everyone you meet on the streets. There were a lot of people who would try to take advantage of you, but I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Despite the desperation I felt, something inside me refused to give up. I kept telling myself I would find a way out of this. Maybe I could find a job. Maybe I could find someone who would take me in. The possibilities seemed endless, even though the reality was cruel and unforgiving. But everything changed the day I found out the truth. It was a late afternoon when I went to visit the only family I had left, my foster mother, Clara. Despite everything, I still held on to the hope that she might take me back, or at least offer some kind of help. I knew it was a long shot, but at that point I was desperate. I showed up at their house, standing nervously at the door, hoping for some sign of kindness. But when Clara answered, she seemed more irritated than surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold. I need help," I said, the words coming out weak. "I don't know where else to go." Clara looked me up and down, her expression hardening. "You need to leave. We've told you already, you're an adult now. Figure it out." I felt the sting of her words, but it was the next moment that really changed everything. As I was about to turn and walk away, something caught my eye. On the table just behind her was a document I instantly recognized. It was a life insurance policy. I froze. Curiosity got the best of me and I stepped closer trying to get a better look. My heart started to pound when I realized what it was. There, in bold letters, was my name. The policy had been taken out in my name, and the beneficiary listed was not me, but Clara and her husband James. The payout in case of my death was an obscene amount. I couldn't breathe. I asked her about it, barely able to keep my voice steady. Why is my name on this? Why would you need life insurance on me? Clara hesitated, and for a moment I thought maybe she would explain it away. But then she spoke, her words cutting through me like ice. We did it for security, she said flatly. You're just a child of the state. You don't matter as much as the money we could get if something happens to you. The weight of her words crushed me. It wasn't just that I was being kicked out. It was the realization that my entire life had been a financial calculation to them. I was never their daughter, never someone they cared for. I was just a means to an end, a pawn in a game that I never even knew existed. Clara. I whispered, my voice breaking. You never cared about me, did you? You just wanted my death for the payout. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. She was cold. She was calculating. And she had never loved me. As I turned to leave, the door slammed behind me and my world felt like it was falling apart. I had always known I didn't fit in, but to know that I had been nothing more than a tool for them was a blow I never saw coming. I stood there on the doorstep, feeling as though the ground beneath me had been pulled away. For the first time in my life I had nothing. No family, no home, no future. I had been abandoned, discarded like a worthless object. But in that moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let them get away with using me like this. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way to make them pay. I walked away from the house, my hands shaking. The weight of the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had always suspected something wasn't right, but I never imagined it would be this. My own foster parents had treated me like nothing more than an insurance policy. I was an object, a mere asset they'd signed away in exchange for a payout. The street felt colder that day. I had nowhere to go. No friends to call. No family to turn to. It was just me standing on the edge of the world, feeling the sting of rejection. The world outside the walls of my foster home was a different place. I had never experienced true loneliness until that day. I wandered aimlessly, unsure of what my next step should be. I couldn't go back to the house, I knew that. But where else could I go? I ended up in a small park near the outskirts of town, sitting on the cold concrete bench, staring out into the empty space. The wind whipped through the trees and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold on to the warmth of a life I thought I had. It wasn't much, but it was mine, or so I thought. By nightfall, I found myself searching for a place to sleep. There were homeless people scattered around the park, some lying under blankets, some sitting in small groups, their faces hardened by the same kind of pain I was beginning to understand. A group of teenagers, probably not much older than me, sat in the corner of the park, drinking and talking in low voices. I could hear their laughter, but it didn't sound real. It was the kind of laughter that comes from a place of hiding pain. I tried to sleep that night under a tree, but the cold kept me awake. I wasn't used to this. I wasn't prepared for how alone I would feel or how brutal the world could be when you have nothing. It was hard not to think about Claire and James. It was hard not to remember what I had been to them, their golden ticket, their insurance policy. I spent the next few days drifting from place to place. I stayed in parks, on benches, in bus stations, wherever I could find a spot. The world felt so big and I felt so small, like I didn't matter, like I had been forgotten by everyone. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold or the fear of what might happen next. It was the constant feeling of being invisible. But as the days passed, I began to meet others who had found themselves in the same position. Other lost souls trying to survive in a world that seemed to have no place for them. I met Tom, a man in his 40s who had been living on the streets for years. He had a rough exterior, his clothes worn and his face weathered by time, but there was a softness to him when he spoke. He told me that he had lost everything after his wife died, and how one thing after another had fallen apart until he found himself here with nowhere to go. He wasn't the first person to tell me how life could change in an instant. There was also Maria, a woman in her 30s with a child. Maria's story was much like mine, one of abandonment and betrayal. She told me how she had been kicked out by her family after her marriage failed, and how she was struggling to keep her son safe while living on the streets. Maria and I formed an unexpected bond, both of us trying to survive, both of us doing whatever it took to make it through another day. Through these brief conversations, I learned to adapt. I learned to be cautious, to trust only those who had earned it. There were plenty of people who would take advantage of your vulnerability, people who would steal from you or hurt you just because you were weak. But I also learned that there were those who would help, even if it was just a smile, a kind word, or a piece of bread. I wasn't sure how long I could last. The fear of being caught, the fear of never finding a way out, gnawed at me every day. But one thing became clear. I couldn't give up. I couldn't let them win. I had to find a way to fight back. To expose what they had done, to show the world that I wasn't just some disposable child who could be cast aside when they were done with me. I didn't know how, but I knew one thing. I would make them pay for what they had done to me. Living on the streets was a crash course in survival. Each day felt like a battle for basic needs: food, shelter, safety. I had never imagined that life could be so brutal, so unforgiving. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake under a thin blanket, clutching it tightly as if it could somehow protect me from the cold or from the dangers lurking in the shadows. But as the days turned into weeks, I learned how to adapt. The park became my makeshift home, the place I returned to every night. It was a space where I felt like I belonged, among the others who had nowhere to go, people who were just like me. It wasn't much, but it was better than wandering aimlessly, and at least I had a place to sleep, even if it wasn't safe. I spent my days asking for help, speaking to people I met along the way, trying to make enough money to buy a meal or at least a warm drink. I learned how to ask for spare change without feeling ashamed, though the embarrassment was always there, gnawing at me. Some days were better than others. On good days, I made enough to eat, maybe even have a cup of coffee to keep me going. On bad days, I went hungry and I learned to endure it. There were moments, too, when people would give me something, leftovers from their meals or a few dollars to get by. It was rare, but it happened. I met a kind-hearted woman one afternoon who handed me a sandwich and told me to be safe. She didn't look at me with pity, but with something that felt like real compassion. For the briefest moment, I remembered what it felt like to be cared for. It was a feeling I had almost forgotten. During my time on the streets, I crossed paths with other homeless people. Some of them had been out there for years, hardened by the brutal reality of life outside the safety of a home. But there was a certain camaraderie among us, a bond forged from shared experiences. People didn't look down on each other here. We all understood what it meant to be invisible, to be forgotten. One day, I met Lily, a woman in her 30s who had been living on the streets longer than I had. She was a former doctor, but life had taken a cruel turn for her. She told me about her marriage falling apart and how, after losing everything, she had ended up on the streets. Her story echoed my own, and there was something about her that made me trust her. Lily became my mentor of sorts, teaching me how to navigate the streets, how to find safe places to sleep, and where to go for food. She even helped me learn how to ask for help without feeling like I was begging. "People will give if you ask the right way," she said, "but don't ever let them see how desperate you are." She taught me how to keep my belongings safe, how to trust only the people who had earned it, and how to look out for myself. She warned me about the dangers of the streets, about the predators who lurked in the dark, waiting to take advantage of someone like me. The more I learned from Lily, the more I understood that survival wasn't just about finding food or a place to sleep. It was about protecting yourself, both physically and emotionally. Despite the harshness of the streets, there were moments of unexpected kindness that reminded me that not everyone had turned their back on the world. Once, I met a young couple who had been living in a car for months. They offered me a place to sleep in their car for the night, which was a rare act of generosity in a world that often didn't care. I couldn't remember the last time I had slept in a safe, warm place, and that night in the car felt like a luxury. But for all the lessons I learned and the kindness I experienced, the weight of the betrayal from my foster family never left me. Every day I woke up, I thought about how they had treated me, how they had used me as nothing more than an insurance policy. I couldn't forget what they'd done. I knew deep down that I wasn't going to stay on the streets forever. This wasn't where I belonged. I had to find a way out. But I also knew it wouldn't be easy. The streets had changed me. I was no longer the naive girl who had trusted those who claimed to care about her. But I was stronger now. I was learning to fight for what I deserved. I didn't know how, but I promised myself that I would expose the truth about what had happened. I would make them pay for using me, for casting me aside as if I didn't matter. The more time I spent on the streets, the more determined I became. I had been knocked down, but I wasn't going to stay down. I would find a way to stand up, to be heard, and to make sure they never had the chance to hurt me or anyone else again. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Living on the streets became a strange routine. I had learned to survive, but survival wasn't enough. The weight of the betrayal from my foster parents, Claire and James, still haunted me, pushing me to do something about it. I couldn't shake the image of the insurance policy with my name on it, a constant reminder that they had never loved me. I was just a tool for them to profit from. I was tired of feeling powerless. I was tired of hiding in the shadows, pretending like nothing mattered. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing what they had done. I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let them think they could use my life for their financial gain and walk away unscathed. They had destroyed my family, my home, my sense of trust in the world. And so, after much thought, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I was going to fight back. It wasn't going to be easy. I didn't have the resources or the support. But I had something more powerful: determination. And maybe a bit of rage too. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all the people who had been used and discarded by those they trusted. I knew I couldn't take on Clara and James alone, especially not without proof. That's where Lily came in. She was no longer just a mentor to me, she had become a true friend, someone I could trust. I explained my plan to her, and despite her own struggles, she agreed to help me. She was the one who had taught me how to survive on the streets, and now she was going to help me take down the people who had ruined my life. The first step was finding a lawyer. I didn't know where to start, but Lily had some connections. She introduced me to Alan, a lawyer who had volunteered his services at a shelter for homeless people. Alan wasn't like the lawyers I'd seen on TV. He was kind, patient, and most importantly, he believed in my case. He listened carefully as I recounted the events of the past year. The betrayal, the insurance policy, the coldness of Clara and James. When I finished, he didn't say much at first. "You've got a strong case, Kendra," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is serious. They can't get away with using you like that." His words were the first real sense of hope I'd felt in months. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. Alan took me through the process of gathering evidence. We had to find the insurance policy, track down any correspondence between Clara and James, and gather testimonies from people who might have known about their plans. It wasn't easy. Clara and James had covered their tracks well, and I had to rely on everything I could remember. Emails, phone calls, and the few documents I had left from my time at their house. One evening, while I was going through some of my old belongings that I had kept in a small backpack, I found a folder hidden at the bottom. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled it out. It was a copy of the insurance policy, one I hadn't noticed before. It had all the details, everything we needed to prove that Claire and James had planned to cash in on my life. I made copies and handed them over to Alan, who smiled and nodded. "This is exactly what we need. They're going to be in trouble," he said, the confidence in his voice reassuring me that we were on the right path. But there were moments of doubt. I would lie awake at night thinking about the consequences of going up against my foster parents. What if they turned it around on me? What if I ended up worse off than I already was? They still had the power to destroy me even if I had the law on my side. But then I remembered what they had done. They had taken everything from me and they had done it without a second thought. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice. It was about making sure that people like Claire and James could never do this to anyone else again. As the days passed, I became more determined. I knew I had to push forward no matter what. There would be risks and I would have to fight every step of the way, but I wasn't going to back down. I had been beaten down before, but now I had something to fight for. I had my life. And I wasn't going to let them take it from me again. The battle had just begun. And this time I wasn't fighting alone. I had the law on my side, I had Lily's support, and most importantly, I had my own willpower to see this through to the end. The moment I had been dreading for so long had finally arrived. The day I would face Claire and James in court. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about holding them accountable for everything they had done, for using me as a pawn in their scheme for money. The stakes were high, and the weight of it all bore down on me like a heavy, unyielding stone. But I had come this far. There was no turning back now. Alan, my lawyer, had prepared me for what to expect in the courtroom. He explained that this would be a lengthy process, one that could take months, maybe even years. But we had a strong case. The evidence we had gathered, especially the life insurance policy with my name on it, was damning. They had used me. They had tried to profit off my life. Now it was time to make them pay. I stood outside the courtroom, my heart pounding. The door felt like a barrier between me and my future, between me and the justice I so desperately needed. Alan reassured me, telling me to stay calm, that the law was on my side. But nothing could calm the storm inside me. Every step I took toward that door felt like a step into the unknown, and the uncertainty terrified me. When I walked into the courtroom, I felt a sense of surreal detachment. The tall, polished chairs, the hushed murmurs of the people waiting, the cold, sterile air, it all felt foreign to me. It was hard to believe that this was where my journey had led me. From the streets, from being a homeless 18-year-old with no one to turn to this, a legal battle with the people who were supposed to protect me. Alan led me to the witness stand. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the podium. I could hear my voice shaking as I recounted everything. The betrayal, the discovery of the life insurance policy, and how I had been kicked out and left to fend for myself. The words felt hollow as I spoke them, like I was reliving the pain all over again. But this time I wasn't just telling my story to anyone. I was telling it to a room full of people who could help me make sure that Claire and James could never hurt anyone again. The defense lawyer, a slick-looking man in a suit, tried to undermine my testimony. He questioned my credibility, painted me as a disgruntled child who had a vendetta against her foster parents. But Alan was quick to shut him down. He presented the evidence. The insurance policy, emails, and phone records that showed Clara and James had been planning this for months. They hadn't just treated me badly, they had plotted to profit off my death. Then it was Clara and James's turn to speak. They sat across from me in the courtroom, their faces cold and unreadable. Clara kept her head low, avoiding eye contact, while James stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. I could see the guilt in their eyes, but they refused to admit it. They had prepared their defense, of course. Clara's voice trembled as she denied everything, claiming that the insurance policy had been a misunderstanding, that they had only wanted to protect me. She tried to present herself as a caring, responsible parent. But the evidence didn't lie. Their story was full of holes, and their lies were slowly unraveling. The courtroom was silent as Alan pointed out the contradictions in their statements. The final blow came when Alan presented one last piece of evidence, one I hadn't even known about. A letter from Clara's own lawyer, which she had sent to a financial advisor, discussing the payout they would receive in the event of my death. It was clear. They had planned it all from the very beginning. The room went silent. It was as if the truth had hit everyone at once. The jury looked at Clara and James, their expressions filled with disbelief. Clara's face flushed with anger, and I saw her hands ball into fists under the table. James, however, looked defeated. He knew it was over. The judge called for a recess and I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs shaking. I had done it. I had told the truth. I had fought back. But I wasn't sure what would happen next. What if the court didn't believe me? What if they found a way to get away with it? The hours seemed to drag on. Alan gave me a reassuring look, but I could feel the anxiety swirling inside me. It wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure they paid for what they had done. Finally, the judge returned to the courtroom. The verdict was read aloud. Clara and James were found guilty of fraud and exploitation, and the insurance policy was ruled invalid. The court ordered them to pay damages for the emotional and psychological harm they had caused me. Their assets were frozen, and they were banned from having any further legal or financial control over me. I had won. But the victory wasn't sweet, not at first. The emotions hit me in waves. Relief, disbelief, and anger all mixed together. For so long I had been just a pawn in their game, an object for them to use. But now I was free. Free from them. Free from the lies. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I had fought for my life. And for the first time in a long time I felt like I could stand tall again. It wasn't just the court case I had won. It was my life. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the judge's gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the trial. I felt my heart skip a beat as I waited for the final words. The verdict was clear. Clara and James had been found guilty of fraud and exploitation, and their actions were ruled as an attempt to profit from my life. But even with the ruling in my favor, the weight of it all didn't lift immediately. As the judge announced the penalties, I looked at Clara and James across the room. Their faces, once so familiar to me, now seemed alien. Clara, the woman who had raised me, who I had once called Mom, sat there with her head lowered, eyes filled with anger and regret. She didn't look at me. Instead, she stared at her hands, trembling with fury as the weight of the court's decision sank in. James, her husband, didn't seem to know where to look. His face was pale, his posture slumped. For the first time I saw him truly defeated. The judge imposed heavy financial penalties on them and froze their assets, including the money they had intended to receive from the insurance policy. They were ordered to pay for my therapy and any emotional damages caused by their cruel betrayal. The court also placed restrictions on their ability to contact me or control any aspect of my life, effectively severing the ties that had bound me to them. As the final details were read, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of triumph and hollow emptiness. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase the scars they had left on me. The victory wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. Yes, I had won the case. Yes, I had exposed their manipulation and selfish greed. But that didn't change the fact that these were the people who had raised me, and they had turned my existence into a financial transaction. It was hard to reconcile the image of the family I had once known with the cold, calculating people they had turned out to be. After the ruling, I was allowed to leave the courtroom with Alan, my lawyer, who was already offering words of encouragement. "You did it, Kendra. This is a big win. You've taken control of your life back." I nodded silently, walking through the hallways of the courthouse, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The air felt heavy around me. I didn't know if I was relieved, angry, or just exhausted. The months of gathering evidence, the late-night conversations with Lily, and the unrelenting anxiety had all led to this moment. But now that it was over, I wasn't sure what to feel. Alan walked beside me, his calm presence grounding me. "What's next for you?" he asked gently. "What are you thinking?" I looked at him, unsure of how to answer. I hadn't allowed myself to think too far ahead. The trial had consumed me, and now that it was over, I felt lost. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I guess I thought winning this case would fix everything. But I'm still me. Still trying to figure out what comes next." He gave me a reassuring smile. "It's okay to take things one step at a time. You've made it this far. You'll find your way." The months that followed were a blur of emotions. There was relief but also a deep, gnawing sadness. While I had gained the financial compensation I needed and the legal battle was over, the emotional toll it had taken on me was undeniable. I was still trying to process everything that had happened: the betrayal, the loneliness, the pain. I returned to the shelter where I had found temporary housing after being evicted from the streets. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place. I enrolled in therapy as required by the court, to help heal the emotional scars left by my foster parents' betrayal. Talking about it, revisiting those painful memories, was tough, but slowly I started to understand the extent of the damage that had been done to me. And then there was the part that I wasn't prepared for: rebuilding my life. The process of healing didn't just involve forgiving Clara and James. It meant forgiving myself too. For a long time I had blamed myself for what had happened. I thought I wasn't good enough, that I was the problem. But through therapy I learned that their actions weren't my fault. They had manipulated me, used me, and in the end discarded me like an object. It wasn't my fault. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. It didn't mean that it didn't leave scars. The hardest part of the healing process was letting go. Letting go of the idea that Claire and James would ever be the parents I wanted them to be. I had to let go of the hope that one day they might love me the way I had always wanted. That dream was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of who they truly were. And that hurt more than anything else. But despite all of it, I began to find my footing again. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love. I had found something far more important: my own strength, my own sense of worth. With the financial compensation I received, I was able to get back on my feet. I enrolled in a job training program and found work at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked hard, learned new skills, and slowly started rebuilding my life, brick by brick. I still had a long way to go. But for the first time I felt like I was finally in control of my own destiny. The road ahead wasn't easy, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never let anyone take my life, my freedom, or my future from me again. And as for Claire and James, well, they had paid the price for their betrayal. And now they would have to live with the consequences of their actions. I was free. Free from their control. Free from their lies. And free to build the life I deserved. It's funny how the hardest part of rebuilding your life is often the first step. The trial was behind me, the truth had been exposed, and Claire and James had paid for their betrayal. But even after all that, I couldn't help but feel like I was still in the same place, lost in a world I didn't quite understand. I woke up every morning in the small room at the shelter, the same four walls surrounding me, but everything else had changed. My life had been completely torn apart and put back together again, but it didn't feel like the same life. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something new, but the future was still a blank page, one that I had yet to write. The days passed slowly, but each one felt like a small victory. The job at the cafe wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. I worked long hours, doing everything from waiting tables to cleaning dishes, but the work felt good. I liked the routine. It gave me a sense of purpose, something I hadn't had in so long. The cafe was a small, cozy place, and the customers were friendly, often chatting with me as I brought them their coffee or refilled their cups. I even made a few friends, including Michelle, one of the other servers. She had been kind to me from the start and often offered to help when the shifts got tough. "Hey Kendra," Michelle said one day, handing me a warm cup of coffee during a short break. "You've been here a few months now, huh? How's everything going?" I took a sip of the coffee, feeling its warmth spread through me. "It's going better than I thought," I replied, trying to keep the hesitation out of my voice. I'm learning to adjust." Michelle gave me a knowing smile. "I've been there, you know. It's hard, but you're stronger than you think. You've got this." Her words were simple, but they meant the world to me. At that moment I realized something important. I wasn't alone. The people around me, Michelle, my coworkers, the people who supported me during the trial, had become my new family. They didn't have to be, but they chose to be. That was something I had never known before. But as much as I was finding small comforts in my new life, there was always that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. the part of me that couldn't quite let go of the past. The images of Clara and James still haunted me, and though I had done everything I could to fight back, the scars of the past remained. I often found myself staring into the mirror, wondering how I had gotten here, how I had managed to survive, and what my future would look like. One night, after a long shift, I decided to walk around the block before heading back to the shelter. The air was cool and crisp, and I enjoyed the silence of the city as the world seemed to slow down. My thoughts drifted back to the trial, to the moment when I had finally spoken the truth, and to the victory I had won. But with that victory came the realization that the fight wasn't over. I wasn't just fighting for my survival anymore. I was fighting to truly live, to take back everything that had been stolen from me. And for the first time I could see a future where I wasn't just surviving, I was living. As I walked, I passed by a community center with a bulletin board outside. A flyer caught my eye: volunteer program, helping homeless youth find jobs and stability. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the flyer. It was like a light bulb had gone off in my mind. I had always wanted to help people, to make a difference, especially for those who had been in my shoes. I remembered how lost I had felt when I was on the streets, how no one had offered me a hand, how hard it had been to find a way out. This could be my chance to give back, to make sure no one else had to feel as alone as I had. The next day I walked into the community center and signed up as a volunteer. I started working with the program that helped young people find stable work and housing. I shared my story with them, not because I wanted pity, but because I wanted them to know that if I could survive, they could too. My experience, my struggles, my pain, it all became a tool to help others. The work wasn't always easy. There were days when it felt like I wasn't making a difference, when the young people I worked with didn't seem to care or were too caught up in their own struggles. But slowly I saw changes. Slowly I saw them begin to trust me, to open up. They started believing in themselves, just as I had started to believe in myself. Every day I spent working at the community center made me feel like I was moving forward. I wasn't just a victim of my past anymore. I was someone who could make a difference, who could help others navigate the same dark streets I had once walked. And that gave me a sense of purpose I had never felt before. As I looked around the community center one evening, watching the kids I had helped walk out with new jobs and hope in their eyes, I realized something important. This was my new family. The people I worked with, the ones I was helping, they were all a part of the life I was building. And I was finally starting to feel like I belonged. The road ahead would still be tough. I knew that. But now I was ready to face it. I had fought for my life once, and I wasn't going to stop now. With the support of my new family, my work, and my own determination, I could face whatever came next. I wasn't just starting over. I was building something stronger, something worth living for.